He was the first to fall and the last to let go. When Sir Edmund Verney was found after the first major battle of the English Civil War, his hand was still wrapped around the king's standard, the banner soaked with rain and mud, as though even death couldn't make him let go. In the winters that followed, when the moor fell silent and the frost returned, villagers saw him again, still raising the royal colours against the night, the rest of the army fighting alongside him, floating in the air. But this isn't just another ghost story. It's the only haunting in England ever witnessed by the king's own officers and formally certified by a magistrate. Come with me as we investigate the ghost armies in the sky over Edgehill, the battle that left its mark brutally on the ground, and one of the most enigmatic pamphlets ever written in English history. And if you like your mysteries with a bit of real history beneath them like this one, make sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. It was the winter of 1642 by the old calendar, and the nights over Warwickshire were long and bitter, the kind that drove men indoors to their fires. In one such house, William Wood, Justice of the Peace for the county, listened as villagers brought word of drums and musket fire on the moor, of men shouting where no army existed. At first, he dismissed it as fear. The Battle of Edgehill had ended only weeks before, and the smell of powder still lingered on the fields. But when the sounds came again, closer and clearer, hurrying through the night air, Wood did what a magistrate must. He pulled on his coat, took a lantern and stepped into the cold. Across the frozen fields he heard it. Volleys of muskets, the cries of men, flashes rising on the ridge. He returned the next evening with 2 witnesses, determined to learn whether the sounds were real or the echo of imagination, and all 3 heard them clearly. By dawn, he'd taken statements, called the parish minister Samuel Marshall, and written what they'd both seen. Marshall later noted that one apparition seemed to advance and retire by the conduct of their leaders, as if the armies were still fighting by command. Within a month, their account would be printed for all of England to read. Now, to understand what they'd seen and heard that night, you have to know what happened there a few weeks earlier. If you've seen my episode on the stone tape theory, you'll remember Edgehill, the first great battle of England's Civil War, and the idea that places can somehow hold memory. This time it isn't the ground that remembered, but the people who lived here. In the autumn of 1642, England was a country divided by belief and power. King Charles I claimed his rule came from God alone, while Parliament insisted no ruler stood above the law. It was a quarrel that began in words and ended in gunfire. That August, the king raised his royal banner at Nottingham, and that same night, a storm blew it down. To many, it felt like an omen. Families took sides. Friends, neighbours and even brothers stood opposite one another across fields. Sir Edmund Verney fought for the king. His eldest son Ralph fought for Parliament. Their names still stand together on the memorial at Middle Claydon, father and son on opposite sides of the same war. So when the king marched south from Shrewsbury to reclaim London, Parliament's armies moved north to block him. Neither side meant to fight that day. They met by accident between Kyneton and Radway. By early afternoon on the 23rd of October, the 2 armies faced each other across a ridge. 15,000 starving men on each side waited in silence. They hadn't been fed much, and the rations were meagre. The first cannon fired, and England's civil war truly began. Before the lines closed, Sir Jacob Astley, who was commanding the king's infantry, he knelt and prayed, "Lord, thou knowest how busy I must be this day. If I forget thee, forget thou not me." Then he rose and shouted, "March on, lads." What followed was confusion and smoke. Orders vanished in the din as neighbours shot at neighbours through the haze. By nightfall, the fields between Kyneton and Radway were choked with powder smoke and the cries of the dying. Sir Edmund Verney was killed carrying the king's standard in the thick of the fighting. The banner was briefly lost and recovered, but his body was never found. According to the Verney family's own tradition, when he fell, his hand still gripped the pike, though severed from the arm. Whether that detail is history or legend, it became the image that defined his loyalty and perhaps his ghost. When morning came, the field was a vision of ruin. Broken standards, shattered gun carriages, the wounded crying for water. Local villagers were sent out under guard to dig graves of men they'd known all their lives. It took 3 days to clear the dead. Many who survived the battle died of cold before dawn, their wounds frozen shut by the frost. Some survived because the frost stopped the bleeding, and surgeons saved others by trepanning skull fractures, a brutal operation that sometimes worked. Centuries later, archaeologists would find the battle still written in the soil. Musket balls, broken armour and hurried graves where the fighting was fiercest. Edgehill was the first real bloodletting of the war, and it showed England what was coming. This battle was a microcosm of the extraordinarily brutal Civil War as a whole. And when the last gun fell silent, neither side could claim victory, only loss. The smoke eventually vanished, but the memory of that battle didn't. What happened here that day would echo for centuries, long after the dead were buried. And so weeks passed, and the moor fell silent again. The bodies had been buried where they lay. The living limped home or were carried there on wagons. For the people of Kyneton, Tysoe and Radway, the war was not far away. It was at their door, because many of the men who had fought there had come from these same villages. They were fathers, sons and brothers who had stood on opposite sides of the ridge and never returned. For days after the battle, the bells of Radway tolled as the villagers buried their dead. Some said they could still hear them when the wind changed. The villagers tried to carry on, but the fields still showed what had happened. Broken pikes in the hedgerows, the soil thick with powder. At night, dogs barked at nothing, and some say they could still hear voices on the wind, familiar ones. Then, one December evening, the sounds returned. It began as a low rumble like thunder. Then came the roll of drums and the sharp crack of muskets. Lights flickered on the hillside, flashes with no source. One night, a great light appeared above the ridge, too high for torches, too steady for lightning. Through it, many said they saw shapes of men and horses engaged as if in battle, the same armies that had clashed there weeks before. William Wood gathered a few men and went to see for himself. As they climbed the slope, the noise grew louder. Volleys and shouting, cavalry in full charge. Yet the ridge was empty. For several nights it continued. Shepherds fled their flocks and villagers barred their doors. Some said they could name the voices. Neighbours, friends and men they had buried with their own hands. When the officers rode out from Oxford to investigate, as later accounts claimed, some people even said they recognised the faces of the fallen, among them Sir Edmund Verney, still raising his banner in death. By January 1643, the story had travelled far beyond Warwickshire. Wood and Marshall sent their report to London, where printers gave it a title no one could ignore. A Great Wonder in Heaven, shewing the late apparitions and prodigious noises of war and battles, seen on Edgehill near Kyneton in the county of Warwick. The title page bore their names, a justice of the peace and a minister certifying what they'd seen. They wrote, "We ourselves, to our great astonishment, heard and beheld the same, the clattering of arms, the noise of cannons, drums and the cries of soldiers, as if two armies had joined battle." The account was reprinted and circulated widely that year, copies reaching Oxford where the King's Council sat. Lord Falkland, the Secretary of State, ordered officers to verify the report. According to later accounts, the King himself sent 6 trusted officers to see the phenomenon for themselves. A colonel, 2 captains and 3 gentlemen of standing. They were said to have recognised among the spectral ranks the faces of men they had known in life. And one particular man, Sir Edmund Verney. According to later tellings, Charles read the account aloud at dinner and remarked quietly that heaven fights on neither side, but remembers all. It was said that at the King's request, a search was made of the battlefield. Bodies were still found unburied, and the men were given a proper rest in consecrated ground. For a time, the visions were said to have ceased. The pamphlet they wrote spread through taverns and churchyards within days. Royalists call it proof that heaven fought for the king. Parliament's presses called it a trick of the devil. Even the ghosts had become propaganda. The witnesses said the armies were not on the ground at all. They were in the air, fighting above the ridge. In the 17th century, the sky was where people looked for meaning. The pamphlet itself echoed Revelation, a great wonder in heaven. To many, it was heaven delivering a warning. Clergy called it a sign of God's anger, the war of angels mirroring the war of men. Others whispered that it was a battle between good and evil, played out above a country tearing itself apart. Modern surveys by the Battlefields Trust note that Edgehill's high escarpment, rising above Kyneton and facing the open Warwickshire plain, often produces temperature inversions, especially in winter. These inversions can carry sound for miles and cause reflected light to appear above the horizon, a phenomenon sometimes mistaken for shapes or movement. Later generations also suggested that when musket or cannon fire echoed from distant training grounds or quarry blasts, common in the centuries that followed, locals at night could easily perceive these as a battle in the clouds. So the pamphlet faded over time, but the sounds didn't. Along the old track called Red Road, some locals say they still hear hooves in the dark, the sound of a retreat that never ended. The battle was over in 1642, but it seems as though the land still remembers it. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this story, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more episodes just like this one, and even consider becoming a member to support the channel. I'll see you next time.